All right, ladies and gentlemen, back again with another edition of Two Men in Black and White, and honest conversation. All right, folks, it was a big weekend. October 18th, a date a lot of people had obviously circled on the calendar because huge numbers showed out for the No King's Day parade, including our Uptown Point God, Brock Gonzalez, was in the mix yesterday. Brock, what was it like to be at Ground Zero?
Well, yeah, I went down to Manhattan. I did it in New York. So the crowd was huge. I just gonna kind of give the facts. Like it was just big numbers. It was hard to get a sense of how many, but it was like started at Times Square, went all the way to
Whoa.
14th Street, and it was just waves of people. Um, a few like observations, and then I'm gonna have some questions for you because yes, once again, it was entirely
Right.
nonviolent. Like zero incidents. I'll post some of the photos maybe, on the YouTube because it was kind of laughable watching the police because they kind of camped out in front of delis and pizzerias. Like
Right.
they were bored. There was more than four of them, but they just had literally nothing to do. Like they're just sitting there bullshitting. Like there was not even the hint of an incident the entire time. And I just keep wondering whether that's good or bad. Like, is it so nonviolent that it's not even necessarily breaking through, like, as being serious enough because it's so many people. But like, I view it as like moderate energy. The last one was like low energy. This one was moderate energy. I would guesstimate that 2% of the crowd was black and brown, maybe 3%. I actually debated with a black woman about this who told me she thought it was 5%. And I was like, oh, that feels a little bit high to me. But she's like, oh, well, we had all these artists in this group over here and playing music. And it's like, okay. So it was maybe somewhere, let's say it was in that range of like a 2 to 5%, which was better than less than 1% of last time, which was like, the last time, like, it was 0.1%. Right. So I thought that was good. It was much younger crowd.
Okay.
It was still anchored by old people, but there were a lot more young people there. And in terms of the signage and the messaging, it was very diverse. It was all over the board. Every issue you could possibly think of was represented yesterday. Like, I'm not a sign guy. Like, my artwork's terrible, but like most people had signs and they were, messaging something. Yeah, and it touched on just about everything. So I thought it was a good day. I walked all the way down to 14th and then I walked back against the traffic on the sidewalk because I wanted to get a sense of how many people there were and what the vibe of the day was. So I was kind of happy I did it. I would view it as a success for the resistance, especially from what I saw around the country and the footage that I saw. But the media coverage today is almost non-existent. It's almost as if it didn't happen. Like the New York Times wiped it off the front page right away. Maybe it was talked about yesterday. I saw CNN covering it and this and that, but that's where I worry that when you're playing so by the rules that like I still don't know. Does MAGA give a shit that it happened? Does Donald Trump even care that there was this, appears to be growing and somewhat starting to unify opposition, or
think he cares.
It hasn't rattled his cage? And
I don't think he cares. And you know
what
why?
Do you think?
Because, look, sadly, I was listening to the Karen Hunter show last week. Must have been Thursday or Friday, just before I left town. And they were calling for a blackout on Black Friday and on Christmas to only shop at Black-owned establishments. So, and one of the guests was even saying, screw Christmas altogether. Let's take our money out of circulation. And, and then the guest
it was a topic yesterday. People were talking about it yesterday.
Good, because that's what they'll understand. And one of the guests, and I can't remember his name, it's been a long 4 days for me, but basically the sentiment was, This billionaire class and this white supremacist movement only understands two things, and that's money and violence. Peaceful protest is not one of them. So I don't know if he's onto something there. I hope not. But we can definitely hit him in the purse strings. That's how you hurt Zuckerberg, Bezos, the billionaire class, Peter Thiel, get off of PayPal or whatever the fuck he owns. And let's hit these guys in the purse string because that's the only thing they'll respect. And, and again, what are we going to do? March down Fifth Avenue, tearing out storefronts, right? At Nordstrom and Macy's.
Yeah,
Like, what does that accomplish? That doesn't get us to any of our political ends.
yeah, nothing. Yeah, yeah. You don't want to
Right.
trash your own town,
Right.
right? Like it doesn't make sense to go just trash. So, like that's why I'm so ambivalent on the topic of I do still wish the energy was a little higher, but I want to hit on the 2 points. I tried to have a bunch of conversations. I had one great conversation
Mm-hmm.
with a black woman. So I want to debunk one theory and challenge you in the black community a little bit. And then also say a little bit what she said to me. One thing she said, she's like, I missed the last one. There was because I asked her, A, were you afraid to be out here? And she's like, no, but even if I was, I need to be out here anyway. And I was like, do you think that the fear is legitimate in the black community? That people and she's like, no, like these protests, and maybe it's just New York, and it could be different in places where there's a
Right.
bigger ICE presence. New York doesn't have much
Right.
of an ICE presence, and certainly ICE wasn't showing up yesterday. There was too
Right.
many people there. They
Right.
didn't want to f
And find
around
out.
with the hundred
Right.
thousand ish that was there. But her point was like Brock. She didn't say Brock. She's like, you got to understand, like black people are doing it economically, like that's what she told me. She's like, black people are doing it economically, but she's like, I do think. Asked her, like, do you think black people aren't out here because they don't trust white people? She's like, it's. She's like, I don't think it's not the trust that you won't like have their back if it goes down. She's more like, black people, she's like, we're still so frustrated about what went on with the vote last year that there's still so many of us that
Yep.
aren't over it. And she even said in trying to get other black women out there with her, she couldn't get
Yep.
over that hump that a bunch of them were like, yeah, you go do that. But like, they immediately just push back and say, those fuckers didn't
Mm-hmm.
vote last year. And like, I'm
Yep.
not getting out there.
Well,
So anyway, it's sort of anecdotal, but it felt like that
Brock,
kind of summed up,
I think
some
she's
of the
dead on.
thinking.
Um, that 92% photo, and I don't know if I've shown it to you, but it went viral after the uh, presidential race, and 92% of African American women voted, for Kamala, right? And everyone said, "Oh, it's all black and brown people's fault." No, 92% of black women said we understood the assignment and carried through. Now, now you're pissed off because he's taking all this stuff away from you. That woman who created that photo of the four women sitting on top of a building watching the city burn, basically saying find somebody else to put the fire out. It's all over the place. She's from Atlanta and does speaking engagements around the city and talks about what led her to create that artwork that became a representative piece for African American women's feelings toward the system and toward those who didn't deem a black woman worthy enough of holding the position, right? Because when you get right down to the end of the day, black women still feel like, nah, you didn't think a black woman was good enough. That's why you voted for Trump. Even in the face, go ahead.
So from yeah,
No, I was
go
going to
ahead.
say,
Sorry.
even in the face of a guy who's been, credibly accused of rape, convicted of fraud, right? 34 counts of ill mannered business practices, a felon, basically. You still thought he was better than the black girl. So you know what? Find somebody else to get out there and do it. And that's why I think a lot of black women are not over it yet and not ready to, you know, get over the hump and come out there and participate in getting rid of this guy. We already tried to get rid of him, is basically what they're saying.
Okay, but so my optimistic read from yesterday was like, I think because I looked at this woman who was like just giving me the rundown, right? I should have like almost videoed her, like, you got to come on our podcast, like, she was giving me the whole rundown, but it got me to thinking, like, okay, maybe there is this group of women like her that are now trying to convince others to say, okay, now it's time. It's been a year, okay, like we've digested it for a year. And I knew the assignment. White people had to be out there again yesterday in big
And they
numbers.
were
Like maybe we have to do it five. Yeah, maybe we have to do it 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Maybe each
bigger and
time
bigger.
it's going to get more diverse. A lot of Asian people out. A lot
Wow.
of Asian people out there yesterday. A lot more Latino people like out there. Mexican flags, Puerto
Wow.
Rican flags, along with a lot of American flags in the crowd, which I just found encouraging. Right? It had the initial feelings of that there could be a
Nice.
unified force because it was just an intermingled group. It was still very, very white. Now, granted, it was also Manhattan, right? So Manhattan's the whitest of the boroughs. Well, Staten Island's
Right.
the whitest of the boroughs,
Right.
but not counting Staten Island, right? And there were their own marches. I think Brooklyn had its
Mm.
own. That may have been even more diverse than the Manhattan one. But it had early signs and early talk of it, and it just the thing I'm going to debunk is, and our message board lit up like a Christmas tree from the last podcast we did about would black people
Mm-hmm.
be out there, right? And I was actually great. It was like people were debating it, white people debating the topic on our message board, but most black people saying,
Right.
no, we ain't going
Right.
to be out there, right? A handful, saying that they were, but most saying, nope, we ain't coming out there. You guys still in your camp. But I'm going to debunk, at least from what I saw in New York. I can't speak for everything, right? But I don't think there's a risk of violence if black and brown people get out there. I don't think there's snipers on the rooftop that are going to be able to shoot through a crowd of tens of thousands of white people and pick off the 2-3% of black or white people. Or ICE is going to be able to barrel in and the white people are all going to like part the sea and let ICE just beat the shit out of black and brown people while all the
Right.
white people go running away. Because that was why I asked, do the black woman is like, do you just not trust that the white people will have your back
Right.
if the shit goes down? Like, do you just think we're all
Right.
going to run for the hills and you're just going to
Right.
get beat
Right.
to a pulp? Well, we don't get touched, right? And I just don't get that vibe. I really feel like the white people will protect the people of color. It felt unified. It didn't feel like it was going to easily break apart. Even there was a lot of people out there, Palestine
Wow.
flags and the like. Now, I don't want that to be too much of these protests because that's actually a topic that kind of
No doubt.
divides the
No doubt.
resistance, But everyone's voice was being heard yesterday, so they were like welcome to have their chance and their message be a
Right.
part of the broader message. But I'm kind of debunking. Maybe in the South it's more dangerous. Maybe in LA and Chicago where there was a lot of ICE presence already. Maybe what I'm saying is bullshit. But certainly in New York, I can't imagine anyone felt any fear at
Right.
all yesterday that anything was going to happen. That was going to happen to them. The army was just too big.
Right.
There was just too many people out there. Like you had to have a military to
Right.
have fought the force that was walking down the streets of New York. And the police they're not looking for trouble. They don't want
Right.
a riot. Like, so they're just watching it going by, hoping nothing happens, right? They don't want to get in the middle of
Sure.
100,000 people. The police can't handle 100,000
No.
people if that turns
No,
into a
sir.
riot, right?
Right.
Everyone's going to get hurt if that happens. So they didn't want that to happen either. And I don't know, I just kind of feel like the police aren't, are at least 50-50.
Right.
They're not
You
all
can't.
MAGA.
Not in New
Not
York.
in
Right.
not in New York. Maybe in like Sumter,
Right.
South Carolina they are, but not in big
Well, and
not
that's the
in
thing
big
about
cities.
Atlanta. In Atlanta,
I mean,
if black people want to go out and march, you can have an all black march in Atlanta, like we saw, with George Floyd and the Breonna Taylors, and the Not Fucking Around Coalition, which was a black militia. There were no arrests that day. Those were heavily armed African American men and women marching through Stone Mountain Park. So in Atlanta, the hub of the civil rights movement, the home of it, actually, you could do that. Now you get outside the perimeter, and now you're getting things a little dicey, right? You're getting into areas that are less diverse, more MAGA, and basically, if you look at the way different areas of the South voted, you could pretty much tell where you can and cannot, get out in large numbers as African Americans. Especially when it comes to, I call them the Big Four, but Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, those can be some scary places, when you get outside, the major cities. Don't sleep on those small towns in Texas and South and North Carolina either. They can get ugly too.
So I'm gonna be pushing back on the narrative of the black people who say they don't want to be at these marches because they think
Yeah.
it's going to be too dangerous
Yeah.
and that they would get picked off. I'm gonna say I want to see it. Somebody come out. Well, for the people that came out in New York yesterday, not one got
Right.
no one got touched yesterday. So I'm like, till I see that happen, I'm gonna be like, you can have other reasons you're saying you're not out there. Maybe you're just saying it's not your fight and white people need to go fight the fight. That's a different argument than saying, no, we think it's gonna get too violent if we're out there. Because until it happens, I'm not buying that argument right now. I'm, white guy, you black community might not give a shit what I have to say on this topic, but I'm just not buying. You can find a march that's big enough and has enough people in it where you can immerse into the crowd and you're not going to get cherry picked out of it. And you can start joining them and feel safe. And I didn't even think, were there any incidents in Chicago? You may have been watching more than me because I was in one. Did anything happen in Chicago, LA? I saw one woman got tackled in like Alabama because she was wearing a penis costume and that was like the biggest incident of the day, and they tackled this 51-year-old woman with a no dictator penis costume and arrested her for disorderly conduct. And it really was like the only incident I read about all morning that happened in the whole country with 7 million people out on the streets.
This morning that said, millions turn out and no arrests, and Trump was furious. He didn't understand how come, these folks who are lawless. Yeah.
We're allowed to do it, right?
And I think the concern is when the clashes start happening like we saw in Trump 1.0, right? That's the concern. Yesterday is not the concern. The problem is we don't know how big these marches have to be in order for Trump to say, hey, go shut that down. Right? Because that's what happened when he held the Bible upside down, right? Outside the famous church that all the presidents go to worship. I mean, at what point does he give those, unlawful orders, to start pelting protesters and start locking people up and start, dropping the hammer? How big?
You better have. I had heard that there was National Guard in the ready in some cities. I don't know. I just read that. I don't know what cities that were. I didn't think it was going to be in the New York area. I hadn't heard anything about it. It wouldn't have made sense. You have to have the National Guard ready to come out. And these numbers are so big. If you're 200 troops against 100,000 people, unless they're gunning them down, if it starts to be like a street fight with just hitting people with batons and some tear gas, that 200 officers might get steamrolled. The power of that many people, if they started moving just in chaos, running towards them, unless they shoot and kill them, because then it becomes like a Jan 6 thing, where if those officers had shot all those people and not shooting them, they were going to get overrun. So you have to make a decision. Am I killing people in front of me, or am I the one that's going to get run over? So,
and therein,
I mean, I guess
that's
Trump
when black people say, hey,
we're going to get to that at some point, Mark. We're going to get to it at some point. It wasn't yesterday, but it's going
Well,
to
we
happen
have to, because
someday.
otherwise, again, what's different, from yesterday morning than this morning? Guy's still in fucking power. He's still running roughshod. The economy's still heading in
Nothing's
the
different.
wrong direction. People are still not feeling good about, this first. We're coming up on a year of this moron in office. Nobody's feeling good about it. I read an article earlier today where, some folks in rural Nebraska are up shit's creek because they heard their medical facility was going to close come first of the year. They got nowhere to go. They're going to have to drive freaking 4 or 5 hours to Colorado, for medical help. And, look, this ain't what we voted for. What do you voted for Trump, bro? You voted for Trump. This is what you wanted. And now you got it. And so everybody's got buyer's.
And I went through that. You know how scary that 4-hour drive is when you're in the car with
Oh, you
someone who's
just
in
went through.
distress, and like you're 4 fucking hours away from the nearest hospital in these rural areas. Are you
Can't imagine.
kidding me? What are you going to do? You're driving at 120. You're driving as fast as that car can go, and you're still maybe going to make it in 3 hours and 40 minutes, right? And it's the helplessness of that moment. Mark, I don't know. The other encouraging thing is that there were people at the march yesterday already talking about a march in DC on November 5th. So I don't know who's organizing that one, like a follow-up sort of what we've been saying, like we need to get everyone to DC type of thing. So I don't know if that was No King sponsored, but there were a lot of flyers. You'd see them on the ground,
really?
all on the walk. So someone had created all these flyers about November 5th. And kind of like everyone needs to go to DC on November 5th type of thing. So I don't know if in 3 weeks that energy will build quickly. And I don't know who's organizing that one, but I loved when I saw it. I was like, okay, let's go on down to DC in 3 weeks, because that's where the rubber will meet the road, and we know, and that's where it can get really confrontational, and that's where Trump maybe would say, "Hey, National Guard, get out there and disperse this crowd." But remember that incident you talked about at that church? That was like a couple of hundred people. What happens when Trump says, "Oh, go disperse that crowd," and it's 20,000 instead of 200, or it's 50,000? How do you disperse 50,000 people?
Live ammo.
If they don't want to move, they're not moving. You're not rolling. You're not going to roll a tank over them, right? Or we'll have our Tiananmen Square moment where someone will stand in front of the tank and we'll be. Then we're in a revolution.
And that's what it may take with this fucking guy. You saw him leave town. All right, he got the fuck out of town. He doesn't care.
Oh, did he? I didn't know. When you're out in the street, you don't know what's going on.
He left Friday. And went to high. Went to go play golf. And all these hospitals are closing, and we're paying what, $3.5 million per golf trip for this fucking guy? We got all these hospitals closing,
and his ballroom's still
going ahead.
His ballroom's getting built. Kristi Noem's got $200 million for like private jets. I mean, there's just the bullshit never ends, right? That's the problem. You wake up the next day after marching and be like, did we accomplish anything? Like this. We're still bombing boats in the Caribbean and just killing random people. We did that again. He won't give Zelensky tomahawks, so we embarrassed ourselves in the Ukraine-Russia thing again. Oh, that Gaza ceasefire lasted what?
20 minutes?
6 hours? Israel's already bombing people again, and Hamas supposedly, they're back at, they're at war again after this big Nobel Peace Prize pomp and circumstance, and it's already fighting.
Give it to Trump. Conflicts he's ended.
There's still a lot of shitty stuff going on. The other thing that I noticed, what I did notice from around the country, there were more politicians who got involved with the marches yesterday, almost like endorsing them and encouraging the people to be out there. So I think that's a difference. Not so much in New York. There was no presence at the New York rally that I saw. But I think in DC and some other places, some of the politicians were out there. I think
No.
in New York they didn't need it. The other takeaway I have is after watching that crowd, I'll be fucking shocked if Mondani doesn't win
Oh
the
yeah.
mayorship. Like, there's no way that crowd that's motivated is going to vote for like Andrew Cuomo or Curtis Sliwa
Curtis
at this
Lewa.
point. Like, I can't even imagine that that wasn't like a highly pro
Right.
Mondani crowd, and that race is that game is over, and hopefully it's a message to the Democrat
Right.
Party in general
We,
that stop running away from young
correct.
dynamic candidates because you're trying to protect some old version of the party that like needs to
Yeah.
be
Absolutely.
mothballed. That was
Absolutely.
that was that was another like, I mean, these are
Yes.
progressive marches. These aren't like middle of the road. There's no Alyssa
Right.
Slotkin cheering going
Right.
on in these
It's not just
types
saved by
of
Social
marches.
Security
Like
either.
these are a lot more people talking about universal health care, because this whole healthcare argument and the realization that the Republicans actually don't have a plan to replace the Affordable Care
Shit.
Act, but yet they want to strip it away from
Right.
people.
Right. All of those who can't afford it won't. I mean, well, premiums are going to triple. Those notices are going out in just a couple of weeks, bro. Those notices are coming out in November, and when they come out, people are going to be shocked out of their minds. Those health insurance premiums going up. The holiday layoffs are coming. Those are coming, right? And we're going into a new year with the big beautiful bill kicking in and all the bullshit, right? And if you're not sure what it is, look at Project 2025. I'll tell you what it is. They will absolutely tell you because they told you what they were going to do. And so, you didn't believe it. Now they're showing you. We knew who Donald Trump was because he showed us. Half the country didn't believe him. More than half. And then they had some help from, Leon Musk and the Muskrats there with the computer glitches with the tally. I still don't think she lost fair and square. And I'm going to go to my grave with that. But nonetheless. All right, give me a quick hit before we get out of here, bro.
Oh wow, I got so many of my funniest thing of the day, staying on the
Yeah.
healthcare topic, is there is this really good clip going around of a MAGA guy, because the MAGA group has used the fact that illegal immigrants are getting
Right.
free healthcare as part of the reason why these
Right.
changes have to be made. That these illegal immigrants are getting this free health care and it's not fair to Americans. So it's picture this MAGA guy who's arguing vehemently that Americans should get the free health care, not the illegal immigrants. So now it's like the progressives are like,
You're right.
we totally agree. You're arguing for
Yeah.
universal health care. You want universal health care. So do we. We agree. The illegal immigrants shouldn't get the free health care, but American
I love
citizens
it.
should get the health care. We're going to reach across the aisle on this one. Now we totally agree. We all want free health care like all these other countries
I
have. And it's
love
just
it.
funny how that messaging has backfired. GOP rarely messes up on messaging, but it's backfired on them by using this free health care, that the immigrants are soaking the system and getting free health care, because it has woke up some MAGA
Right.
knuckleheads to the fact that, like, yeah, they
Right.
get
We
free
want it
health
too.
care. They pay all these taxes. Other countries get it, and we're giving it to illegal immigrants, and they're not getting it. That's a right that they should have. So I just
That's
find it really
hilarious.
funny that has been sort of one of the outgrowths of this whole healthcare argument, because the whole
Right.
shutdown's about
Right.
healthcare. So people are talking about healthcare more than ever,
So, hey,
maybe in this country, because of what you talked
I
about, the
love it.
premiums and this that. So anyway, that was my
I
funniest.
love it. Send me
That was
that
my
when you get a chance.
you know
I want to.
funny
I want
clip.
to put that in rotation.
What do you got for me? What do you got for me? What's America look
So,
like from afar? Because maybe the viewers don't know, but you have a
yeah.
family event. You're
So watching
outside
on
of
the
the
BBC,
the mix right now.
folks really talked about the crowds that showed up. Our crowds have been paltry, compared to some of these other protests going on around the world. And so watching, you know, international news, um, it was kind of a big deal that we had the kind of numbers that we had. So I think the world finally recognizes that the U.S. is tired of Trump, as are they. So, but it was an interesting take because, you never know how you're being looked at, by the rest of the globe. Um, but again, we have to realize that the people that Trump does business with, are the people that are also shunned by the rest of the civilized society around the world, right? With the Erdogans and, you know, Putin's and, Kim Jong Un's, these people, nobody else wants to really, embrace them like Trump does, right? And be like them and emulate them like Trump does. So, it's interesting watching European news, watching the European coverage. They were, impressed at how many people showed up to rally against Trump. Matter of fact, it was one of their, you know,
Did you know like it's sort of an about time feeling, or
yes,
is it's nice to see the American people are sort of waking up and like
it was
kind of
like
coming
Americans
around?
finally are getting the hint, and finally waking up to this guy's nonsense and his, the stupidity of it all, because that's what we're dealing with, you know, the just the sheer lunacy, Rob. So yeah, I mean, it's funny too because we were almost being, ridiculed the world over. You know, I mean, we didn't see any of that coverage from Europe, but if you went on YouTube and watched some BBC coverage of Trump's visit to the UK, I mean, he was the laughing stock of news coverage when he was there. All the protests, all the signs, the balloons. I mean, he was just, comical fodder. For the people of the UK, they can't stand that fucking guy. And he's not even allowed to go to the golf course over there in Scotland because convicted felons aren't allowed to enter the country. So, the guy is really a joke. The fact that we let him hoodwink us again is really, really sad. Um, but yeah, we look like laughing stocks, to the rest of the world. And now they're saying, oh, it looks like the Americans are finally, onto this guy. Like it's taken us forever and a day to wake up. So, yeah, man.
4 year term
Right,
and then one
right.
more
You
year,
gotta
right?
be
I
kidding
mean,
me.
Jesus.
But, hate will do that for you. And we keep saying it's the racism, stupid. So, when you can't get your loved one to that local hospital that used to be there, rely on your racism to get you some help. See how that worked out. At all.
It's not going to work out very well
At all.
for too many
All
people.
right, bro. Good stuff, man. Glad you were able to get out.
All right, good stuff, Mark.
Yes,
Good to
sir.
touch
We'll crack
base.
it up and do it again tomorrow.
All right.
All right, buddy. Talk
All
at
right,
you.
talk to you tomorrow.
Peace.
Bye.